Clara slammed the ledger onto Victor Langley's desk so hard the oil lamp rattled. 2 years, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, which was somehow worse than shouting. 2 years you've been stealing from these men, from their wages, from their land. She pressed her finger into the page. I have every number, every forged signature, every account. Langley leaned back in his chair and smiled the way men smile when they believe a woman alone can't touch them. Miss Bennett, he said smoothly, you have no idea who you're dealing with. No, said a voice from the doorway. Everyone froze. But you do. If this story is already pulling you in, please subscribe to this channel and follow along until the very end. Drop a comment below and tell me what city you're watching from. I'd love to see just how far this story has traveled. The morning Clara Bennett stepped off the stagecoach in Silver Creek, Wyoming, the dust was so thick she could taste it. She didn't mind. She had tasted worse things in the past year. She had tasted the bitterness of watching a lawyer hand her family's farm over to a man who had never once touched the soil. She had tasted the humiliation of sitting in a county office and being told very politely that there was nothing to be done, that the paperwork was in order, that the deal was legal, and that she ought to find herself a respectable situation somewhere else. She had tasted the long silence of a house that no longer belonged to her. So yes, dust she could handle. She stood on the edge of the main street and looked at Silver Creek the way a woman looks at a card she's been dealt that she didn't ask for. She wasn't going to fold, but she wasn't going to pretend the hand was good either. She had $11, a single suitcase. A letter of introduction from a woman she barely knew, addressed to the foreman at Hawthorne Ranch, a cattle operation about 4 miles outside town, that was, according to the letter, always in need of someone who could manage records. Clara Bennett could manage records. She could manage a great deal more than that, but she kept that to herself. The wagon ride out to Hawthorne Ranch took 40 minutes, and the man driving it barely said 2 words the entire way. Clara didn't mind that either. She used the time to watch. She noticed the size of the land. She noticed the way the fences stretched further than she could see. She noticed that the main house, large, well-built. The kind of house that spoke of real money, had its front windows open and curtains that moved in the breeze, and not a single person standing on the porch waiting to greet anyone. A ranch this size would normally have someone expecting her. Instead, there was a man repairing a section of fence near the gate. He didn't look up when the wagon stopped. How was working the way men work when they aren't performing for anyone, steady, focused, unhurried. He wore a plain gray shirt, dark with sweat at the back. His hat was old. His boots were older. The wagon driver called out, "Got the new records woman from town." The man at the fence straightened slowly. He pulled off one work glove. He looked at Clara. Men usually looked at her, sizing her up, deciding something. But the way a person looks at someone, they genuinely want to understand. "Miss Bennett," he said. "That's right. I'm Ethan." He didn't offer a last name. "I'll show you where to get settled." He put the glove back on and finished driving the fence post before he moved. Not rudely, just he was going to finish what he'd started. Clara picked up her suitcase and followed him. She didn't know it yet, but that single moment, a man finishing a job no one was watching him do, would stay with her for a long time. The foreman, a barrel-chested man named Holt, met her at the office door and took over the introduction with the efficiency of someone who had very little patience for anything that wasn't immediately useful. "You'll be managing supply records, wage logs, and inventory," he said, leading her through a side door into a room stacked with ledgers. "Previous woman left in March. Didn't say why. Don't ask around about it." Clara didn't ask around about it, but she filed the information away. People didn't leave jobs without reasons. Holt continued. "Mr. Langley oversees operations. He'll want to meet with you end of the week. You answer to him on anything financial." "Questions?" "Just one," Clara said. "Who is Ethan?" Holt glanced at her sideways. "Ranch hand. Good worker. Keeps to himself." He paused. "Why?" "He was the first person I met. I like to know who I'm working around." Holt's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. "He's nobody you need to worry about," he said. "Just does his job." Clara nodded. She looked down at the first ledger and opened it to the beginning. Just does his job. She had a feeling that wasn't the whole truth. Within her first 3 days, Clara learned the rhythms of Hawthorne Ranch, the way you learn any complicated place, by being quiet and paying attention. She learned that the supply wagons came in from the north on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She learned that the kitchen crew started before dawn, and that if you weren't there early, the coffee was gone. She learned that the bunkhouse held 23 men, that most of them had been at the ranch for years, and that most of them did not talk openly about their wages or their contracts. That last thing was interesting. Men who have been fairly treated don't avoid the subject of their pay. They complain about it openly, the way people complain about weather. It's a social exercise, an expression of solidarity. Men who avoid the subject of their pay have learned that speaking about it causes problems. Clara kept that to herself too. On her 4th morning, she woke early and went down to the kitchen before most of the crew was up. She poured herself a cup of coffee and sat at the long wooden table with a ledger open in front of her. She wasn't alone. Ethan was already there, sitting at the far end of the table with a mug in his hands, reading something, not a dime novel, not a newspaper, but what looked like a worn agricultural report. He looked up when she sat down. "Morning," he said. "Morning." She looked at what he was reading. Supply yields. He glanced down at the report. Water table forecasts. North pasture's been dry 2 summers running. Thinking about how to manage the grazing rotation. Clara looked at him for a moment longer than she intended. Ranch hands didn't typically read water table forecasts and think about grazing rotation management. Ranch hands did what they were told. Planning strategic thinking about land use was management work. "That's not really fence repair territory," she said carefully. He looked at her with the same calm directness she'd noticed from the first moment. "Nobody told me it wasn't." She almost smiled. "Fair enough," she said, and went back to her ledger. But she was thinking about him. The first mini-climax came on the 5th day. Clara had been cross-referencing the supply delivery records with the inventory counts, which was routine work, the kind of thing you did to keep the numbers honest. And the numbers at Hawthorne Ranch were on the surface perfectly fine. On the surface. But Clara had spent the last 3 years of her life watching her family's land get stolen by paperwork, and she had learned something important in that process. The lies are never in the numbers that are wrong. The lies are in the numbers that are almost right. Almost right meant someone was paying attention. Someone was being careful. Someone was making the fraud just small enough to go unnoticed by a person who wasn't looking for it. She found the first discrepancy on page 47 of the March supply ledger. 40 pounds of grain recorded as delivered paid for, signed off by the foreman. But when she checked the storage inventory log for the same week, the storage count showed only 31 pounds received. 9 pounds missing. That was a small thing. A mistake. An error in recording. She told herself that was what it was and moved on. But then she found another one. Different week. Different supply item. Same pattern. $8 recorded. $7.30 received. She closed the ledger slowly and pressed her hand flat on the cover. This is how it starts, she thought. Small. Almost nothing. Until it isn't. She didn't tell anyone what she'd found. Not yet. She needed to be sure. That evening, when the main work of the day was done, and most of the hands had gone to the bunkhouse, she walked out toward the east pasture because she needed air and because sitting still, when her mind was running this fast, made her feel like she might come out of her skin. Ethan was there. He was sitting on the top rail of a fence at the edge of the pasture, looking out at the land in the last hour of light. He wasn't doing anything, just watching. The way people watch things, they find genuinely beautiful. Clara stopped a few feet away. He heard her and glanced over but didn't say anything right away, which she appreciated. Some people felt the need to fill every silence. He didn't. "You do this every evening?" she asked. "Most evenings." "Just sit and look at it. It helps me think." She leaned against the fence post. "What do you think about?" He was quiet for a moment. What's real? He said finally. What's worth protecting? It was an unusual answer. She turned to look at him. You always talk like that, she asked. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was close. Like what? Like everything you say is about three things at once. Now he did smile, brief and genuine. Maybe it is, he said, and he went back to watching the pasture. Clara stood beside him for a while without speaking, and the strange thing was that the silence wasn't uncomfortable at all. It felt like the most honest conversation she'd had in weeks. Victor Langley arrived on Friday. He was exactly the kind of man Clara had expected to meet at a ranch like this, well-dressed in a way that was just deliberate enough to be a statement, confident in the way men are confident when they've been told their whole lives that rooms belong to them when they enter. He shook Clara's hand with the practiced warmth of someone who had decided in advance that she was going to like him. Miss Bennett, I've heard excellent things about your first week. Thank you, Mr. Langley. Holt tells me you're thorough. He smiled. I appreciate thoroughness. We have a great many records here that have needed a careful hand for some time. I've noticed, Clara said. Something flickered in his eyes. Noticed. Noticed that there's a lot of material to organize, she said smoothly. I'll have a full picture of the current state by end of next week. He studied her for just a half-second longer than necessary. Excellent, he said. We should have dinner sometime this week. I like to know the people who work closely with the books. I'd appreciate that, she said. She watched him walk away toward the main house, and she kept her expression neutral, and she thought, he's not checking whether I'm good at my job. He's checking what I know. That evening she went back to the ledgers. She worked until midnight. By the time she was done, she had found 11 discrepancies across 6 months of records. All of them small. All of them careful. All of them adding up to something that was no longer small at all. She sat back in her chair and pressed her fingers against her eyes. Someone at Hawthorne Ranch was stealing. Systematically. Patiently. In a way designed to be invisible. And whoever was doing it had been doing it for a long time. She almost missed Ethan that night. She was walking back to her room across the main yard when she heard voices near the supply barn. One of the younger hands, a boy of maybe 17 named Will, talking in a low, urgent voice, and Ethan talking back in the calm, measured way he had. I'm telling you, I counted it twice, Will was saying. My pay's been short 3 months running, not by much, but it's short. I know, Ethan said. You know. I've been tracking it. You're not the only one. Silence. What do we do? Will asked. You let me handle it, Ethan said. Don't say anything to Langley. Don't put it in writing. Just give me a little more time. Clara stood very still in the shadow of the barn wall. Her heart was beating too fast. You let me handle it. A ranch hand, who was tracking wage discrepancies and telling a frightened 17-year-old boy to trust him. Who read water table reports and thought about grazing rotation. Who sat at the end of the table in the morning reading agricultural forecasts that management-level men read. Who was this man? She waited until the voices moved away, and then she stood there alone in the dark for a long moment. She needed to know. The next morning she found him at the fence again. She waited until there was no one around them, and then she said quietly, I know about Will's wages. He went still. Very still. Not guilty still. Not caught still. More like careful still. Like a man deciding something. He turned and looked at her. How? I was walking back last night, and I heard you talking. He held her gaze. How much did you hear? Enough. She paused. I've been finding discrepancies in the supply records too. Small ones. Spread out across 6 months. I haven't said anything to anyone. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise exactly. Something more complicated. Why not? He asked. Because I need to understand what I'm looking at before I start saying things that can't be unsaid. She looked at him directly. And because I don't know yet who I can trust. I was quiet for a moment. Then he said, That's the right answer. Who's doing it? She asked. He turned back to the fence. I have ideas. Is it Langley? No answer. Ethan. He looked at her then, and for the first time she saw something in his face that he'd been keeping very carefully contained. Not anger exactly, but something that had the same shape as anger. Something that had been sitting in him for a long time. Don't ask me questions I can't answer yet, he said. Not here. Then where? He thought about it. East pasture, tonight, after dark. She nodded. She walked back toward the office. Her hands weren't shaking. She was surprised to realize she wasn't afraid. She was focused, sharp and clear in a way she hadn't been in over a year. Since before the farm. Since before the lawyers and the paperwork and the long grinding humiliation of watching someone steal what was hers. She knew this feeling. It was the feeling of finally being on the right side of the truth. She went to the east pasture that night. He was already there, sitting on the ground this time, his back against the fence post, and there was enough moonlight to see by. He didn't greet her with small talk. He just started talking. The discrepancies you found in the supply records, they've been going on for almost 2 years, he said. Not just supplies, wages, land lease payments, contracts with smaller ranchers in the county who sell cattle to this operation. 2 years, Clara said quietly. She sat down a few feet away. How do you know all of this? Because I've been watching it happen. Why haven't you stopped it? He was quiet for a moment. Because I needed to know how deep it goes, he said. If I stop just one piece of it, whoever's responsible adjusts and hides the rest. I need the whole picture. He paused. And I needed someone who knew how to read the books. Properly. From the inside. Clara looked at him. A slow, uncomfortable thought was forming at the back of her mind. Holt said you were just a ranch hand, she said. Holt says a lot of things. Are you just a ranch hand? He met her eyes, and she couldn't read what was in his face. Not deception, not guilt, but something careful. Something that was making a decision. For right now, he said, I'm the man who needs your help to stop someone from destroying this ranch and the people who depend on it. It wasn't a full answer. She knew it wasn't a full answer, but she let it go. Because it was enough truth for tonight. Over the next 2 weeks, they worked in silence and in pieces. Ethan would leave her information, not formal evidence. Nothing written, just details mentioned in passing things. He'd noticed numbers he'd tracked from memory, and Clara would cross-reference them against the books. She found the wage theft first. Systematic. Careful. Every man's pay had been shaved by somewhere between 40 cents and $2 a month. Over 2 years across 23 workers, it was significant money. She found the supply fraud second. Delivery manifests inflated the difference pocketed before it ever reached the ranch. She found the land records third, and that was the one that made her stop breathing for a moment. 2 parcels of ranch land. Smaller holdings that bordered Hawthorne on the southwest had land documents that appeared to have been quietly altered. Lease agreements made to look like sales. Rights of way recorded in ways that benefited someone other than the ranch. Someone wasn't just stealing money from Hawthorne Ranch. Someone was slowly, carefully, piece by piece, stealing pieces of the land. She sat in the records office at 11 o'clock at night and stared at that discovery for a long time. She was thinking about her family's farm. She was thinking about paperwork and lawyers and the polite smiles of men who believed they were untouchable. She was thinking about how this patient invisible theft was what had been done to her family, and how no one had believed her, and how she had arrived here with $11 and a letter of introduction and a grief she hadn't named yet. She pressed her hand flat on the ledger. Not this time, she thought. Not here. Not to these people. She went to find Ethan. He wasn't in the bunkhouse. He wasn't at the fence. She found him finally in the equipment barn, checking a saddle in the lamplight with the focused attention he gave to everything. I found the land documents, she said. He set the saddle down slowly. How bad, he said. Bad enough that someone is planning to own pieces of this ranch without anyone knowing it until it's too late to fight. He turned to look at her, and she saw it again, that contained thing in him that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite grief, but was somewhere between them. "It's Langley," she said. It wasn't a question anymore. He held her gaze for a long moment. "I think so," he said finally. "But thinking isn't proving." "I can prove it," she said. "Give me 3 more days." He looked at her carefully. "Clara." It was the first time he'd used her first name. They both noticed it. "If he figures out what you're doing," Ethan said quietly, "he won't just warn you. He'll move to discredit you before you can say anything. He'll tell people you altered the records yourself, that you came here looking for something to steal." "I know," she said. "That doesn't—" "I know," she said again firmly. "I've had that done to me before, watching someone lie about me in front of people who believe them. I know what it costs." She paused. "That's why I'm not going to give him the chance." He was quiet for a long moment. 3 days, he said finally. She nodded and turned to leave. "Clara." She stopped. "Be careful," he said. "Not because I think you can't handle yourself. Because I'd like—" He stopped. Started again. "Because it matters. What happens to you? It matters." She stood very still for a moment. She didn't turn around. She said quietly, "I know." And she walked back to the records office and worked through the night. By the 3rd day, she had everything. The wage records, the supply manifests, the inflated delivery orders, the altered land documents, all of it cross-referenced, organized, and documented in a way that was impossible to dismiss. She had also found something else. Something she hadn't been looking for. In the older records from 5 years ago, there was a name. E. A. Whitmore, owner, Hawthorne Ranch. She stopped. She read it again. E. A. Whitmore. Ethan. She sat with that for a very long time. And then, something much larger, something that rearranged everything she thought she understood, began to take shape. She thought about a quiet man who read water table reports. She thought about a ranch hand who told a frightened boy, "You let me handle it." She thought about a man who said it matters what happens to you in the voice of someone who had a right to care what happened to this ranch, to these people, to her. She thought about the name, E. A. Whitmore. Her hands were steady on the page. Her heartbeat for the first time in 3 days was not. She closed the record book. She sat in the silent office with the lamp burning low and the night pressing against the windows. She had come to Hawthorne Ranch looking for work. She had found something she hadn't expected. A fraud that needed to be stopped. Workers who needed someone to speak for them. And a man who was not who she thought he was, or maybe who was exactly who she thought he was, and simply more besides. She pressed her hands flat on the desk and breathed. 3 days, he had said. She had done it in 3. Now she needed to decide what to do with everything she knew, including the piece she hadn't been given permission to know. She stood up. She put on her coat. And she went to find Ethan Cole. Or whatever his name really was. She found him at the water trough behind the main barn, washing the day's work off his hands. The lamp above the barn door threw just enough light to see by. She stopped a few feet away. She had planned what she was going to say the entire walk over. She had arranged the words carefully, the way she arranged evidence logically in the right order, without room for misunderstanding. Then she looked at him, and the arrangement fell apart. E. A. Whitmore, she said. He didn't flinch. He didn't turn around immediately either. He let the water run over his hands for 1 more second. Then he straightened and reached for the cloth hanging on the post. When he turned to face her, he looked like a man who had been expecting this moment and had not been looking forward to it. "Clara, don't," she said. Her voice was quiet, but there was an edge in it she wasn't bothering to hide. "Don't say my name like that, like you're about to explain something to someone who needs to be calmed down." He closed his mouth. "I found the ownership records," she said. "From 5 years ago. Your full name is in the charter documents for this property, Ethan Alexander Whitmore, owner." She let that sit for a moment. "You own this ranch." He didn't deny it. That was the part that hit her harder than she expected. Not anger, not betrayal exactly, but the specific sting of realizing that she had been right about a thing she'd hoped she was wrong about. "How long?" she asked. "Since my father passed," 7 years. And the name Ethan Cole. My mother's family name. He held her gaze. I use it when I want to move around the ranch without everyone performing for me. Performing, she repeated. That's an interesting word for it. It's the right one. He took a step toward her and stopped when she didn't move to close the distance. Do you know what happens when the hands know you own the place? Everything changes. The way they talk, what they tell you, what they hide. I've been trying to understand what was happening on my own land without everyone adjusting themselves for the man who signs their checks. And me, she said. Was I adjusting myself for you? Something moved across his face. No, he said. You were the first person I met in 2 years who talked to me like I was just a person. She stared at him. That doesn't make it right, she said. I know that. You let me dig through those records not knowing who you were. You let me put myself in front of Langley, not knowing who was standing behind me. That is not nothing, Ethan. That is not a small thing you forgot to mention. You're right. He said it plainly without deflection, without the elaborate justifications she had been prepared to argue against. You are completely right, and I'm not going to tell you it wasn't a choice because it was. She looked at him for a long moment. The anger was real. She wasn't going to pretend it wasn't, but underneath it, something else was happening, a kind of recalibration, her mind moving through everything she'd observed in the past 2 weeks and seeing it now in a different light. The water table reports, the quiet authority he had with the hands without ever raising his voice. The way Will had said you let me handle it and meant it trusted it without any visible reason to trust a man who was supposed to be his equal. There had been a reason. She just hadn't known it. Why tell me now? She asked. Because you found the documents and came to me directly instead of taking them to Holt, he said. That means you already decided to give me a chance to explain. And I owe you the truth. He paused. All of it. She crossed her arms. Then give it to me. He nodded once, and he told her everything. The real story of what was happening at Hawthorne Ranch was uglier than Clara had imagined, and she had imagined something fairly ugly. Victor Langley had been the ranch's operations manager for 4 years. He had come with strong references, a polished manner, and the kind of quiet efficiency that made ranch owners sleep well at night. Ethan, traveling between his various properties in the territory, managing a sprawling cattle business that stretched across 3 counties, had trusted him. For a while there had been no reason not to. The ranch ran smoothly. Profits were steady. The hands seemed content. But 14 months ago, Ethan had come back from a 3-month trip north, and something had felt wrong in a way he couldn't immediately name. The ranch looked fine. The books Langley showed him looked fine. But the hands were quieter than they should have been, and the older men who'd been on this land for a decade had stopped looking him in the eye. That was the tell. Men who had been cheated didn't look you in the eye. Not because they were ashamed, but because they had learned that meeting the gaze of someone with power was a risk they could no longer afford. I started watching, Ethan said. Just watching. Langley is smart. He doesn't leave obvious holes. The only way to catch him was to let him think he was still safe, while I built up enough that he couldn't explain it away. He paused. And then your application came through. Clara looked at him sharply. My application. I read every application for the records position personally, he said. Yours mentioned that your family had lost a landholding to a fraudulent deed transfer 3 years ago. The words landed on her like something cold. You hired me because of what happened to my family, she said slowly. I hired you because of how you described what happened to your family, he said. Most people write about loss like it's something that happened to them. You wrote about it like it was something you were still working to understand, like you were still pulling it apart, looking for every piece of how it was done. He met her eyes. I needed someone who had learned how fraud actually works, not from a textbook, from the ground. Clara was quiet for a long time. She was thinking about the letter she had written. 3 weeks of applications to ranches and businesses across the territory. And she had written that particular letter at midnight after a sleepless night, angrier than she usually let herself be, and more honest than was probably strategic. She had almost rewritten it. She hadn't. "You could have told me," she said finally. "If I told you who I was, you would have been careful," he said. "Around Langley, around everyone. And Langley is very good at reading careful." He looked at her steadily. "The only reason your investigation has gotten as far as it has without him moving against you is because he thinks you're just an employee who stumbled onto something she doesn't fully understand. If he knew you were working with me with the owner, he would have moved already," she said. "Yes." She let out a breath. She hated that he was right. She hated it specifically because it meant that the deception, infuriating as it was, had also been the thing protecting her and protecting the case they were building together. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," he said, "we finish it." The next morning everything looked exactly the same, and that was the most dangerous part. Victor Langley arrived at the ranch office at 8:30, as he did every Wednesday in his good coat with his polished boots and his comfortable smile. He stopped to shake hands with two of the hands in the yard. He asked one of the younger boys about his mother's health. He was warm and easy and effortlessly likable, and watching him move through the space he had been quietly stealing from for 2 years made something cold settle in Clara's chest. She kept her face neutral. She had gotten good at that. "Miss Bennett." He stopped at the office door. "Good morning. You're in early." "I'm always in early," she said pleasantly. "Coffee's on the table if you want it." He came in. He poured himself a cup. He glanced just briefly, just for a fraction of a second, at the ledgers on her desk. She watched him do it without watching him do it. "I've been meaning to ask," he said, settling into the chair across from her, with the ease of a man who believed he controlled every room he entered. "How are you finding the records overall in good order?" "Getting there," she said. "There are some inconsistencies I'm still working through. Old recording errors, most likely." "Of course." He nodded sympathetically. "The previous woman wasn't the most organized. I'm afraid she left things in rather a state." Clara said, and wrote something in the margin of a document. She felt him watching her write. "Anything I can help clarify?" he offered. "Not yet," she said, "but I appreciate the offer." He left 20 minutes later. She counted to 30 after the door closed, and then she let herself breathe. He was going to move soon. She could feel it the same way she had felt something wrong before the lawyers came for her family's farm. A shift in the air, a careful attention from people who had seemed inattentive before. Victor Langley had just looked at her ledgers in a way that meant he was calculating something. She needed to move faster. She found Will that afternoon by the water troughs doing evening checks on the horses. Will was 17, lanky, with the kind of face that still showed everything he felt, which in the current situation meant that the moment he saw Clara walking toward him with purpose, he looked like a man trying to figure out which direction to run. "I'm not going to get you in trouble," she said quietly. "I promise. But I need you to help me." He looked at his boots. "Ethan said." "I know what Ethan said. This is different." She waited until he looked up. "I need the names of every man whose wages you know have come up short. Not guesses. People who've told you directly." He was quiet for a long moment. "That gets out," he said slowly. "Langley finds out who talked. He did it to Marsh. Marsh, Tom Marsh, was here before you. Figured out the supply numbers didn't add up and said so to Langley directly." Will paused. Next week, Langley told Holt that Marsh had been stealing equipment. Showed him a bill of sale he said Marsh had forged. He looked at her. Marsh left with nothing. Couldn't get work in 3 counties. Clara held very still. "When did this happen?" she asked. "March," he said. "March. The same month the previous records woman had left. Didn't say why. Don't ask around about it." "Will," she said quietly, "I need those names." He looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "All of them. All of them." He took a breath. "Meet me after supper, by the east fence." She nodded. She walked back toward the office, and she was already thinking 3 steps ahead, which was good, because she needed every advantage she could build right now. Because Tom Marsh was the confirmation she had been missing, proof that Langley didn't just steal. When threatened, he destroyed, and he had done it before. That evening, Ethan found her before she found him. He came into the records office without knocking, which was unlike him, and closed the door behind him, and the expression on his face made her set down her pen. "What happened?" she said. "Langley asked Holt about your background today," he said. "Who gave you the reference? Where you worked before? Whether anyone had checked your credentials?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop. "He's building something," Ethan said. "I know. He did it to Tom Marsh." She watched his face. "You knew about Marsh?" "Yes." "And you still needed more before you moved against Langley?" "I needed it to be airtight," Ethan said, and his voice had something in it she hadn't heard before, the specific weight of a man who was holding himself responsible for something painful. "If I had moved on what I knew last March, I could have protected Marsh. I know that." She looked at him. "You have to stop trying to protect everyone yourself," she said. "That's not what's needed right now." He looked at her. "What's needed," she continued, "is that we stop him. Completely. Everything. The wages, the supplies, the land documents, and what he did to Marsh." She met his eyes directly. "Are you ready to do that?" He didn't hesitate. "Yes." "Then I need you to do something that's going to be harder for you than any of the rest of it," she said. He waited. "I need you to let me lead this," she said. "Not because you can't. Because Langley is watching you right now as Ethan Cole Ranch hand nobody. The moment he knows who you are, he moves. But me—" She paused. "He thinks I'm alone. He thinks I'm the weak point." She held Ethan's gaze. "Let him keep thinking that." Something worked its way across Ethan's face, a complicated thing, part resistance, and part something that looked almost like admiration. "You want to use yourself as the lure," he said. "I want to let him make the move he's already planning," she said. "Because when he makes it, he'll expose himself. And this time, there won't be any question about what he is or what he's done." He was quiet for a moment. "If it goes wrong," he started. "It won't," she said. "Not bravado, just certainty. The kind you built out of having nothing left to lose and everything worth fighting for." He held her gaze. Then quietly, "What do you need?" What she needed was three things. The first was the complete wage records for every hand on the ranch going back 2 years. Not the official ledgers, but the real ones. The amounts actually paid. She needed Will's list cross-referenced against what she'd found in the books. The second was a witness. Someone who had seen Langley alter a document sign off on a delivery that never came or received money that should have gone to the ranch. Not suspicions. An actual witness. The third was the original land charter for the 2 parcels that had been quietly redirected, the one that existed before Langley's version, which would show the alterations clearly if placed side by side. Ethan handled the third. I had copies of the original documents locked in a strongbox in the main house, because he was the kind of man who kept the originals of important things, regardless of what anyone else filed. Clara had begun to understand that this was simply how he operated. Careful, thorough, quietly prepared for the moment when preparation became necessary. He brought them to her at midnight without a word, set them on the desk, and left. Trusting her completely with documents that represented thousands of acres of his family's land. She worked through the night. By the time the first gray light came through the window, she had built something that was, she believed, complete. Not just evidence. A story. A clear, documented, irrefutable account of what Victor Langley had done in what order and what it had cost the people he had done it to. She sat back and looked at it. She thought about Tom Marsh, who had lost everything and couldn't get work in 3 counties. She thought about Will, who had counted his short wages twice, just to be sure he wasn't wrong before he said anything to anyone. She thought about 23 men who had kept their mouths shut and their eyes down because they had learned that speaking cost more than silence. She pressed her hand flat on the table. Then she picked up the witness. Because Ethan had been right about one thing. She had needed a witness, and she hadn't told him yet that she had already found one. It wasn't Will. It wasn't any of the hands. It was Holt. She went to Holt's office just after sunrise. He was already there. Holt was always already there. A man defined by his work in the way that men sometimes are, when work is the thing they trust most. He looked up when she came in, and his face did what it always did, which was almost nothing. "Miss Bennett." "I need 5 minutes," she said. "I have a supply wagon due at 7. "Holt." She set a single page on his desk. "When was the last time you verified a delivery against this manifest personally?" He looked at the page. She watched him read it. She watched the moment when he found the number she needed him to find the discrepancy between what was listed and what had been paid in Langley's handwriting, countersigned by Holt himself 3 months ago. His jaw tightened. "I signed this," he said slowly. "Yes, I signed it because Langley brought it to me and said it was routine." "Yes," she said again. I was quiet. "How many like this?" he said finally. "Enough," she said. "Holt, did you know?" He looked up at her sharply, and the anger in his face was the most emotion she had seen from him in 3 weeks. "No," he said flatly. "I did not." She believed him. "Then I need you to help me prove it," she said. "And I need you to understand something first." She paused. "The man who's been doing this has already destroyed one person who got too close. He will try to do the same to me. And if he does, it will land on everyone around me, including you." Holt looked at her for a long, hard moment. "What do you need?" he said. She told him. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said something she hadn't expected. "The young cowhand," he said. "Ethan Cole." He paused. "He came to me 6 months ago and told me he had concerns about the books. I told him he was overstepping." He looked at the page on his desk. "I've been thinking about that conversation ever since." Clara kept her face neutral. "He was right," Holt said. "He usually is," Clara said carefully. Holt gave her a look that was sharp and perceptive in a way she had underestimated him for. "Is he?" Holt said. Clara held his gaze. "Right now," she said, "he's the man helping us stop this." She paused. "The rest you'll find out soon enough." Holt picked up the manifest. "Tell me what you need me to do," he said. The following day, Langley made his move. Clara had expected it. She had even expected the form it took. He went to Holt, not to her directly, because men like Langley understood the hierarchy of pressure. You didn't confront the problem. You went above it. He told Holt that Clara had been removing documents from the records office, that she had been seen accessing the strongbox in the main house, that he had reason to believe she was building a false case against him in order to cover her own activities. He said it smoothly with concern in his voice, and he brought with him a single piece of paper, a supply record that appeared to show Clara's handwriting, authorizing a payment that had never been processed. He had forged her handwriting. Clara stood in the hallway outside Holt's office and heard every word of it through the closed door. She had not planned to listen. She had come to bring Holt the final wage comparison she'd promised him. But she heard her name in Langley's voice, and she stopped walking. And she stood there very still, and she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not fear, but the close cousin of fear. The awareness of exactly how exposed she was. How easily a smooth-voiced, well-prepared man could take the story she had built and fold it over until it pointed at her instead of at him. She had been here before, standing outside rooms where people were deciding things about her. She pressed her hand flat against the wall. She breathed once. Then she straightened up, pushed open the door, walked in. Both men turned. Langley's expression moved through surprise and then settled into something calculated and cool. "Miss Bennett," he said. I know what you were doing," she said. She looked at Holt. "The signature on that document is forged. I can prove it. I have the original supply records in my room with my handwriting across 6 weeks of entries. A comparison will take 10 minutes. Langley smiled. "That's a very serious accusation. So is yours," she said. She looked at him directly. And I would like to know, Mr. Langley, if you genuinely believe I've been falsifying records. Why haven't you brought that to the ranch owner?" Silence. "Why Holt?" she continued. "Why not go directly to the man who owns this land and let him decide?" Something shifted in Langley's face. Something that was almost not quite, but almost fear. "The owner isn't present," he began. Actually, said a voice from the doorway, "he is." All three of them turned. Ethan stood in the doorway. He was wearing the same work clothes he always wore, but he was standing differently than he ever stood around Langley, not smaller, not deferential, not the quiet ranch hand who minded his business and stayed out of the way. He was standing like a man who owned the ground he was standing on. Because he was. Langley stared at him. And Clara watched the exact moment when Victor Langley understood. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was just a slow, precise collapse. The expression of a man whose entire construction of reality had just shifted underneath him without warning. "Ethan Cole," Langley said carefully. "Ethan Whitmore," Ethan said. "This is my ranch, Mr. Langley, and I think it's time we had a real conversation about the books." The silence in Holt's office lasted maybe 4 seconds. It felt like 4 minutes. Langley recovered first, because men like Langley always recovered first. That was the skill that made them dangerous, and when he did, he smiled. Not the warm, practiced smile Clara had seen him use on the hands. A different one. Thinner. The smile of a man who had decided that the best defense was still offense. "Mr. Whitmore," he said, adjusting his tone as smoothly as a man changes his coat. "I'm relieved you're here, actually. I've been trying to bring a concern to Holt's attention about some irregularities I've noticed in the records. Irregularities that I believe Miss Bennett may be responsible for." Ethan stepped fully into the room. He looked at Langley the way you look at something you've been watching for a long time and are finally done being patient about. "I heard you," Ethan said simply. Langley's smile didn't waver. "Then you understand my concern." "I understand that you walked into my foreman's office and made an accusation against my records manager using a document with a forged signature." Ethan's voice was even, measured, not raised even slightly. "And I understand that you've been doing variations of that same thing for approximately 2 years. The smile finally cracked, just at the edges, just enough. "That is an extraordinary claim," Langley said carefully. "It is," Ethan agreed. "Which is why Miss Bennett has been documenting it for the past 3 weeks. He looked at Clara. Not for confirmation, he didn't need it. He looked at her the way partners look at each other when the moment they've been working toward has finally arrived. She opened the leather folder she was carrying and set it on Holt's desk. "Supply manifests," she said, her voice steady. 22 separate deliveries over 18 months. The recorded amounts and the actual received amounts don't match. The difference in each case is paid to a secondary account through a routing number that traces back to a land office in Cheyenne. She turned to the next section. Wage records. Every man on this ranch has been underpaid by a margin of between 40 cents and $2 per month for the past 24 months. The total represents a significant sum. She turned to the final section. Land documents. 2 parcels on the southwest border of this property have been recorded in a way that transfers certain rights to a holding company that was registered in Denver 14 months ago. She looked up. "Would you like to know who registered that holding company, Mr. Langley?" He said nothing. His jaw was tight. His eyes had gone somewhere cold and very focused. "We can save time," Ethan said. "His name is on the registration." Langley looked between the two of them, and Clara watched him run the calculation the same way she had watched him run calculations before the small, quick assessment behind his eyes when he was deciding what to say next. Only this time, the numbers weren't working out. "You'll never prove any of this in a court," he said finally. "Documents can be misread. Records have errors. Land filings are complicated legal territory." He straightened his coat. "And any attorney worth his fee will point out that this evidence was assembled by an employee with limited context and a ranch hand who has no legal standing." "I have every legal standing," Ethan said. "I own this ranch." "A man who has been hiding his identity for months," Langley said, and now his voice had sharpened to something uglier. A man who admits to deceiving his own employees. Who sent a woman to do his investigation without identifying himself or providing her any legal protection. That's not going to look good, Mr. Whitmore. That's not going to look good at all. The room went quiet. Clara felt the words land. Not because they broke her, they didn't, but because Langley had found the one real crack in their position and put his thumb directly on it. He wasn't wrong, and they all knew it. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Just a moment. Then he said, "You're right." Everyone in the room stared at him. "I made decisions that put Clara at risk," he said. "I'm going to have to live with that." He didn't look at Langley when he said it. He looked at Clara, direct and honest and completely without defense. "But what I'm not going to do is let that fact become the reason you walk away from what you've done." He looked back at Langley. "You have one choice here," Ethan said. "One. You sit down in this office with Holt as witness, and you tell me everything. Every account, every arrangement, every person you've paid or been paid by, and every man on this ranch whose wages you've touched. You give me all of it in writing today." He paused. "Or I send for the county sheriff and the land office in Cheyenne simultaneously, and you explain it to them instead." Langley let out a short, hard breath. It almost sounded like a laugh. "You think the sheriff is going to side with you over me?" he said. "I have relationships in this county going back 12 years. You've been absent from your own ranch for most of 3 years. Who do you think they're going to believe?" "Bring in the sheriff," Clara said. Both men looked at her. "Bring him in," she repeated, looking directly at Langley. "Because I would very much like to introduce him to the 14 men on this ranch who are prepared to testify about their wages, and to Holt, who signed documents you told him were routine and are willing to say so, and to Tom Marsh, who I've already written to and who wrote back 2 days ago to say he would come back to Silver Creek if there was a real case being made." She paused. "He will come back. He would like to very much." Something happened to Langley's face when she said Tom Marsh's name. It wasn't a dramatic collapse this time. It was smaller than that. It was the look of a man who realizes the person across from him knows more than he thought, has been further ahead of him than he knew, and has been giving him the chance to stop while still choosing not to stop. The look of a man who finally understands the room. Holt, who had been silent since Ethan walked through the door, set his hands flat on his desk and stood up slowly. "Victor," he said, "sit down." It was 3 words, said quietly, without heat. Langley sat down. The next 2 hours were the longest of Clara's life, and she had lived through some long hours. She had lived through the night the lawyers came for her family's farm. Through the morning after, when the house was still theirs, but felt like it wasn't. Through the weeks of letters and appeals that went nowhere and cost money she didn't have. This was different. This was long in the way that surgery is long. The careful, necessary removing of something that had been poisoning things for a long time. Langley talked, not all at once, not willingly. He talked the way a man talks when he has run out of options and is trying to the very last moment to retain some control over what gets known and what doesn't. He negotiated every sentence. He framed every admission as a mistake rather than a decision. He spent 40 minutes trying to make the case that the wage discrepancies were an accounting error he had been in the process of correcting. Holt stopped him on that one. "I've been watching you run payroll for 4 years, Holt said flatly. "You don't make accounting errors. You are the most methodical man I have ever worked with." He paused. "That's what I told the owner when I recommended we keep you on 2 years ago. I said you never made mistakes." He looked at Langley with something that was close to exhaustion. "I was right about that. You didn't make mistakes. You just made choices." Langley looked at Holt for a moment, like a man who has just understood that the last person he thought was still on his side wasn't. After that, the talking went faster. Clara wrote down every word, every account number, every name, every arrangement. She wrote it in the same clear, precise hand she used for the ledgers, and she didn't look up from the page, and she didn't let herself think about anything but accuracy. There would be time later to feel the weight of it. Not now. "Jaw," When it was done, when Holt had signed his own statement and the document had been set aside to dry, Langley looked up at Ethan. "You'll ruin me," he said, not accusing, just saying it out loud the way a man says a true thing when he's stopped trying to control the narrative. "You ruined yourself," Ethan said. "I'm just making sure the right people know about it. I built this operation," Langley said. "Everything that ran smoothly here for 4 years, the contracts, the supply lines, the relationships with the county. The people who work this land built it," Ethan said. "You managed what they built, and then you stole from them." He was quiet for a moment. "There's no version of this where those are the same thing." Langley looked at his hands. He didn't say anything else. Holt stood up and went to the door and called for 2 of the older hands to come inside. The thing was done. Clara walked outside. She needed air, not because she was upset, but because the room had been close and tense for 2 hours, and she needed to recalibrate, to let her heartbeat find its regular rhythm again. She stood in the yard and breathed. She heard footsteps behind her and knew without turning that it was Ethan. He stood beside her, not close enough to crowd her, just present. The way he'd been present from the beginning she understood now. Reliably there. Quietly attending. "You did it," he said. "We did it," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "I shouldn't have let it go this far before telling you who I was." She kept looking ahead. "You already said that." "I know. I want to say it again because I mean it every time." She turned to look at him. The morning light was behind him, and she looked at his face, the same face she'd first seen repairing a fence post the afternoon. She arrived the same face she'd talked to in the kitchen over coffee, the same face she'd seen beside her in the east pasture, watching the land as if he genuinely loved it. She had thought she was looking at a ranch hand. She had been looking at a man. Those happened to be the same thing. "It didn't change who you were," she said finally. He looked at her. "The deception," she said. "It didn't change who you actually were. That bothers me more than I expected." "Why does it bother you?" She looked away. "Because it would be simpler if you'd just been different when I found out the truth. If you'd been arrogant about it, or dismissive, or if you'd tried to frame it like you'd done me a favor." She paused. "But you were exactly the same. You were the same man who ate with the hands and fixed fences and read water table reports and told a 17-year-old boy that you'd handle it." She was quiet for a moment. "The money doesn't change that. The money doesn't change what I see when I look at you either," he said quietly. She felt that land somewhere in her chest. She didn't answer right away. She thought about $11 and a suitcase. About arriving in a strange town with a letter addressed to a foreman. About the particular freedom of being nobody, no history, no expectations, just the work in front of you and the character you chose to show. She thought about how Ethan had lived that freedom for 7 years while owning one of the largest cattle operations in the territory. She thought about what that said about him. "I need time," she said. "I know," he said. "I mean it. Not as I'm not saying it to be polite. I genuinely need to sit with everything I've learned in the past 3 weeks and figure out what I think about it." "I understand that." She looked at him. "You're not going to argue with me." "No," he said simply. "Why not?" He met her eyes. "Because I've spent enough of my life watching people decide things based on what they wanted the truth to be, instead of what it actually was. I'm not going to do that to you." He paused. "Take the time you need. I'll be here." She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded once and walked back inside. But she was aware more than she wanted to be of the specific quality of stillness he had as she left, like a man who had learned how to wait for things that mattered. The week that followed moved in 2 layers simultaneously. On the surface, practical, necessary, relentless. The county sheriff arrived on Thursday. He was a deliberate man named Anders, who asked careful questions, read every document Clara had assembled twice, and then sat very still for a long moment before saying, "I'm going to need to take all of this with me." He did. Langley left Hawthorne Ranch on Friday morning in the company of 2 deputies. He did not look at Clara as he passed her in the yard. He did not look at Ethan. He looked at the ground, and Clara thought there was something almost small about him now, not physically, but in the way he occupied space. As if the confidence that had made him seem large had been a costume, and the costume had been taken away. She didn't feel triumphant about it. She had expected to feel triumphant. Instead, she felt tired and a little sad in the way you feel sad when something you've been fighting so hard is finally over, and the fighting itself has been the structure holding everything upright. Word got out among the hands by that evening. Clara was in the records office organizing the copies she'd kept of everything when Will knocked on the doorframe. "Is it true?" he said. "About the wages?" "Yes," she said. "It's true." "All of it, Marsh, too. I've written to Marsh," she said. "Ethan, Mr. Whitmore has asked him to come back. His name will be cleared." She paused. "It's going to take some time, but yes." Will was quiet. She looked up. His jaw was tight, the way young men's jaws go tight when they're feeling something they haven't decided yet whether to express. Then he said, "My father worked this land for 8 years before he passed. He always said Hawthorne Ranch was the one operation in the territory that was run with real respect for the men on it." He paused. "I stayed because I believed that, even when the wages started coming up short. I kept telling myself I'd misread it." "You hadn't," Clara said. "I know." He looked at her. "Thank you," he said. "Just that. No decoration on it." She nodded. After he left, she sat for a moment with her hands in her lap. She thought about her own father, about the farm, about the land that had gone to someone who had never loved it, would never love it, saw it only as a number to be added to a column. She thought about how she had arrived in Silver Creek angry and exhausted, and carrying that anger like extra weight in her suitcase. She thought about whether she felt lighter now. She did. Somewhat. Not entirely. Because the anger had been honest, and honest things didn't disappear just because you'd done something useful with them. On Saturday evening, Ethan knocked on the records office door. He had cleaned up, not formally, not the way men clean up for occasions, but he'd washed and changed his shirt, and he was holding his hat in both hands, the way men hold hats when they're nervous and don't want to show it. Clara found that detail unexpectedly moving. "I'd like to show you something," he said. "If you have a few minutes." She looked at him. "The east pasture," she said. The corner of his mouth lifted. Close. She followed him. He led her to the main house, the large, well-built house she had noted her first day with its open windows and its air of being occupied but not quite lived in. He opened the front door and led her through to a room at the back that turned out to be an office of a very different kind than the records room where she worked. This was a room for someone who ran things. Maps on the walls. Land surveys. Cattle records going back 30 years. The accumulated evidence of a working operation that had been in one family long enough to have real history. And in the center of the desk, a ledger. The oldest one she'd ever seen. The kind that had been handled by many hands over many years. "My father's," Ethan said. "He started this ranch with 140 acres and 12 cattle. It took him 20 years to build it to what it is now." He looked at the ledger. He used to say that the most important thing he could do every single day was remember where he started. That's why he kept the original books. He looked at Clara. He never bought land he didn't intend to love. Never hired a man he wasn't willing to stand beside. He paused. "I've been trying to be the kind of man he was. I don't know that I've always gotten it right." She stood very still. "You asked me last week why I live the way I do," he said. "Why I work alongside the hands and eat at the long table and fix fences when I don't have to." "I didn't ask that," she said. "No," he said. "But you were thinking it." She almost smiled. "My father taught me that if you want to understand what's happening on your land, you have to be in it," he said. "Not above it, in it. Because things look very different from above. Cleaner. Less complicated. And a lot of the complications are the part that actually matter." He looked at her. "I stopped being in it for a while. Spent too much time managing at a distance. I told myself it was efficient." He paused. "It was comfortable. Which isn't the same thing. And coming back," she said. Working as a ranch hand on your own land reminded me of what I'd stopped paying attention to, he said. Including, he stopped, started differently. I've been living with money my whole adult life. I know what it does to people's honesty, to conversations, to the way people decide what to tell you and what to leave out. He set the hat down on the desk. What I didn't know until about 3 weeks ago was what it felt like to have someone talk to me every day without any of that factoring into it. Clara looked at him. She understood what he was saying. She understood it clearly, and the clarity of it was uncomfortable because it meant that what had happened between them, the coffee in the early mornings, the East pasture evenings, the honest and uncalculated conversations they'd had while she believed he was a ranch hand, those had been real on both sides. Not performance, not strategy. Real. And now all of that sat inside the larger, more complicated truth of who he was. The thing I can't figure out, she said carefully, is whether anything would have been different if you had told me from the beginning who you were. He thought about that honestly. Yes, he said. Something would have been different. What? You would have been careful around me from the first day, he said. The way you were careful around Langley, correct and professional and impossible to read. He met her eyes. I wouldn't have known what you actually thought about anything. And I would have missed... He stopped. I would have missed getting to know you. She was quiet for a moment. That's not entirely a justification, she said. I know, he said. I told you. It was a choice, not a good one. Just the one I made. She looked at the old ledger on the desk. The first one. 140 acres and 12 cattle and 30 years of a man's life building something worth protecting. Your father would have liked you, I think, she said. The version of you I met 3 weeks ago. Ethan looked at her. And the version you met today, he said. She met his eyes. Ask me again in a week, she said. But she was almost smiling when she said it. And he saw it, and he was careful so carefully not to press his luck. He just nodded and picked up his hat and held the door for her as they left. The week brought its own complications, because nothing ever simplified cleanly, not in real life. The land office in Cheyenne sent a representative, a crisp young man named Aldridge, who wore spectacles and asked very precise questions and seemed genuinely unsettled by the quality of Clara's documentation. This is unusually thorough, he told her, turning through the pages. I had good reason to be thorough, she said. He asked her about her background. She told him. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said in a different tone, The Whitmore land case. I've seen your family's name in the territory files. I'm sorry about your property, Miss Bennett. That was a complicated situation. It wasn't complicated, she said evenly. It was fraud. The complication was that nobody with authority wanted to say so. He cleared his throat. Yes, he said. Well. He looked back at her documentation. There will be no such ambiguity here. She believed him, partly because the evidence was genuinely clear, partly because the man whose name was on the ownership charter of Hawthorne Ranch was not a poor widow farmer, but one of the most significant landowners in the Western Territory. And she had lived long enough in the real world to understand that the same crime with a different victim got handled very differently. That truth sat in her uncomfortably. She didn't hide from it. She brought it up at dinner that evening. She and Ethan and Holt had been eating together in the main house kitchen every night that week, a practical arrangement that had taken on a comfortable domestic rhythm that Clara was carefully not over-examining. The land office will move quickly on this, she said, because of who you are. Ethan looked at her. Yes. Tom Marsh isn't going to get the same speed. I know that too, he said. I've already written to an attorney in Cheyenne. Whatever legal process Marsh needs to clear his name, I'll cover the cost. She hadn't expected that. She showed it. You're surprised, he said. I'm surprised you'd already thought of it before I brought it up, she said honestly. He shrugged. Looked at him. That phrase, the obvious next thing, said so much about how he thought. Not grand gestures. Not performative generosity. Just what was needed done quietly, because it was needed. She picked up her fork. That's good, she said. That's the right thing. I know, he said. And then quietly, without any weight in his voice, "I've been trying to do the right thing for a long time. It's easier when someone's paying attention." She didn't answer that, but she didn't look away either. Chate. On Wednesday, 8 days after Langley left, something happened that nobody had anticipated. A letter arrived from Denver. It was addressed to Ethan, but Clara was the one who happened to be in the main office when Holt brought the post in, and Holt set it on the desk and said, "There's a seal on that one. Legal, looks like." She looked at the seal. The return address was the holding company Langley had registered in Denver, the one that had been quietly accumulating rights to the southwest parcels of the ranch. She set it aside carefully for Ethan. He opened it 2 hours later while she was in the room, and his expression as he read it went through something she couldn't quite track. Not alarm, but something serious, something that made him read it twice. "What is it?" she asked. He set the letter down. "Langley had a partner," he said. She went still. "The holding company wasn't just him," Ethan continued. "There's a co-registrant. The letter is from their attorney notifying me that the company intends to dispute the land status on those 2 parcels. They're claiming a valid purchase agreement exists." He paused. "And they're right that an agreement exists. It's just forged, which we know, but proving it in a dispute with an active legal claimant is more complex than correcting a filing error," Clara finished. "Yes." She looked at the letter. "Who is the partner?" she asked. Ethan looked at her. "Judge Warren Colby," he said. "County Circuit Court, Silver Creek." The silence in the room was absolute. Clara heard her own heartbeat. Judge Colby, the man who signed off on land transfers in the county. The man whose court would hear any case brought against Langley. The man who had been on the bench in Silver Creek for 9 years and was universally described in every conversation she'd had since arriving as a pillar of the community. The man who was it now appeared Langley's silent partner. She looked at Ethan. "You said Langley had relationships in this county going back 12 years, she said slowly. "Yes, 9 years of Colby's bench and 12 years of Langley's connections." She paused. "How long have they known each other?" "That's the question," Ethan said. They looked at each other across the desk. She thought about the sheriff coming on Thursday, about the documents she'd handed over, about the fact that in every legal matter arising from this case in Silver Creek, Wyoming, the proceedings would move through the circuit court of the Honorable Warren Colby. "We have a problem," she said. "Yes," Ethan said. "Everything we've built is solid," he said firmly. "The evidence is solid, Clara. It doesn't matter who Colby is. The land office in Cheyenne answers to Federal Territory Authority, not county court. The wage fraud is a criminal matter that can go to the territory level." He paused. "We just have to make sure it goes there before Colby can get his hands on it." "How?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I need to go to Cheyenne." She looked at him. "When?" "Tomorrow morning," he said. "I'll take everything you've documented, all of it. I'll file directly with the Territory Attorney's Office and the Federal Land Commissioner." He paused. "I need you to stay here." Something in her face shifted. "I can come with—" "I need you here," he said again, and his voice was quiet but clear. "Not because I'm trying to protect you, because you are the one person Langley's partner does not yet know to worry about. If you come with me, we leave Holt alone with information that Colby may already be moving to suppress." He held her gaze. "I trust Holt, but Holt is one person, and you are better than this than anyone I have ever met." She looked at him. She thought about everything she knew and what she was only beginning to understand about the reach of the corruption she had stepped into. She thought about her father's farm. She thought about Tom Marsh. She thought about 23 men who had been shorted their wages and kept their mouths shut because staying quiet was the only protection they knew. She thought about a judge who had been sitting on a county bench for 9 years, wearing respectability, like a costume, while his partner quietly picked apart a man's land. She looked at Ethan. "Go," she said. "I'll hold it here." He held her gaze for a moment, and in it was everything he didn't say. "I trust you completely. More than anyone. That has not changed and will not change no matter what happens next." She read it clearly. She held it carefully. She did not say it back, not yet, but she let him see that she had heard it. He left before dawn, and Clara sat down at the desk with all the copies she had kept, and she started building the second wall of evidence, the one that would be needed when the first one was challenged. She worked through the night. She was still working when the sun came up. She was still working when Holt knocked and told her with a look on his face she hadn't seen before that Sheriff Anders had ridden out from town. Not to help. To ask her to stop. She looked up from her papers. "On whose authority?" she said. Holt's expression answered before his words did. "Colby's," he said. Clara set down her pen. She was not afraid. She was something else entirely, a thing sharper than fear, cleaner and more purposeful. She straightened the papers in front of her. She squared the corners of the folder. She stood up. "Tell the sheriff I'll see him in the yard," she said. Sheriff Anders was a man Clara had respected until about 30 seconds ago. She had respected him because he had come to the ranch the week before and asked careful questions and read every document twice and seemed like a man who understood that evidence was evidence, regardless of who it pointed at. She had respected him because he had taken everything she gave him with the deliberate seriousness of someone who intended to use it properly. She still respected him. She decided as she walked out into the yard and saw him standing there with his hat in his hands and his expression carrying something she recognized as a man who was ashamed of himself but going to do the thing anyway. She respected him less than she had before, but she respected him a little still. "Miss Bennett," he said. "Sheriff," she said. He cleared his throat. He glanced at Holt, who was standing 3 feet behind Clara's left shoulder with his arms crossed, and the expression of a man who had stopped being neutral about things 48 hours ago and was not going back. "I've received a directive from Judge Colby," Anders said, "regarding the investigation into Hawthorne Ranch operations." "What kind of directive?" Clara said. He looked at her directly. She gave him credit for that. He didn't look at his boots. "The judge has issued a stay of proceedings, pending a review of the evidentiary materials. He's concerned about the chain of custody, whether the records were obtained through appropriate means." Clara looked at him. She kept her voice completely level. "The chain of custody," she said, "for records that have been sitting in a ranch records office, that I was hired to manage, by the owner of the ranch. I understand how it sounds." "Do you understand who Judge Colby is?" she said quietly. Anders went still. "Because I do," she said. "I know his name is on the registration documents for the Denver holding company that has been filing for rights to 2 parcels of this property. I know that company was co-created with Victor Langley, and I know that means the judge issuing a stay on this investigation has a direct financial interest in this investigation, not proceeding." She paused. "That is not a legal complication, Sheriff. That is corruption. And the difference matters." The yard was very quiet. One of the hands. Clara didn't know which one. Without looking, she wasn't going to look away from Anders, had stopped whatever he was doing. She could feel it. The particular quality of stillness that meant someone nearby had stopped to listen. Anders held her gaze. "Miss Bennett," he said, and his voice had dropped. "I am not here because I believe the judge is right. I am here because I work in his county, and he issued a legal directive that I am bound by my office to deliver." He paused. "I delivered it. What you do with it is your business." She looked at him for a moment. "That was a very careful thing to say," she said. He put his hat back on. "I'm a careful man," he said. He looked at Holt. "Good morning, Holt." "Sheriff," Holt said. Anders turned and walked back to his horse and rode out of the yard without looking back. Clara stood where she was for a count of 5, breathing, organizing. Then she turned to Holt. "Get me paper," she said. "I need to write to Ethan, and I need it to get to Cheyenne faster than the judge can send someone to intercept it." Holt was already moving. The next 24 hours required Clara to be 5 things at once. She was calm because the hands needed someone to look at who wasn't panicking, and she was the person available. She was fast because every hour that Colby had to move against the evidence was an hour that mattered. She was careful because haste and carefulness were not opposites, and she refused to let anyone tell her they were. She was angry in the contained and useful way she had learned to be angry, the way that didn't spend itself on shouting, but instead converted directly into action. And she was afraid. Not for herself exactly. She was afraid in the specific way you are afraid when you understand the full shape of what you're standing against, and you understand it better than the people around you because you've seen it operate before, and you know how it ends when it wins. She had seen it end that way once. It was not going to end that way here. She wrote to Ethan in clear and complete terms everything that had happened, everything she understood about Colby's position and his likely next move, and what she believed they needed to do. She folded it, sealed it, and gave it to the youngest hand on the ranch, a boy named Danny, who was 16 and rode faster than anyone on the property, with instructions to ride hard for Cheyenne and put it in Ethan Whitmore's hands personally. Nobody else's, she said. You understand, if anyone tries to take it from you before you find him, you put it inside your shirt and you keep riding. Danny looked at her with large, serious eyes. Yes, ma'am, he said. He left at a gallop. Then Clara went back inside and started writing a second set of documents. These were different from the first. The first set had been evidence records, numbers accounts. This set was a narrative. A complete chronological account of every action taken, every document found, every conversation held, every decision made in the course of this investigation. Written in plain language. Precise and readable. She wrote it because she understood something Langley had understood and turned against her, and that she was now turning back. The story of what happened mattered as much as the evidence of what happened, because evidence without narrative could be reframed, and narrative without evidence could be dismissed. But evidence and narrative together, clearly and honestly assembled, that was a thing that was very hard to take apart. She was still writing at 2 p.m. when she heard horses in the yard. Not one horse. Several. She set down her pen and walked to the window. 3 men she didn't recognize. Well-dressed. Not working clothes. Clothes the kind men wore when they'd come a distance with purpose. They were talking to one of the hands in the yard. The hand was pointing at the main house. Clara had a very specific feeling in her stomach that she had learned over the past several years to pay attention to. She picked up the folder on her desk. She walked directly to Holt's office, set the folder inside the locked cabinet where she kept the copies of everything, locked it, and pocketed the key. Then she went out the front door to meet whoever was arriving. The man who stepped forward was about 50, broad-shouldered, with a well-trimmed gray beard and the steady, unhurried movement of someone accustomed to rooms paying attention when he entered them. "Miss Bennett," he said. "Yes," she said. "My name is Gerald Price. I'm an attorney from Cheyenne representing the interests of a holding company currently engaged in a property dispute with Hawthorne Ranch." He held out a document. "I've been asked to deliver this notice directly." She took the document. She looked at it. She read it carefully, beginning to end, not skimming, not letting herself react visibly to any part of it. It was a legal injunction, filed in the Circuit Court of Silver Creek County, signed by Judge Warren Colby. It ordered the suspension of any financial investigation into Hawthorne Ranch operations, pending a full review, enjoined Clara from accessing or removing any records from the property, and most significantly named Clara Bennett personally as a party to the dispute on the grounds that she had obtained access to sensitive financial records under false pretenses. She lowered the document. She looked at Gerald Price. She felt the particular cold of recognizing a move you've seen before. This was what had been done to Tom Marsh. Not the same words, not the same form, but the same structure turned the investigator into the accused. Make the person holding the evidence into the person with something to explain. She had known this was coming. She had hoped it would come a little later. "Mr. Price," she said, "has your client authorized you to accept documents on their behalf?" He blinked. "I'm sorry. Has your client authorized you to accept documents?" she repeated. "I want to ensure that the counter notice I have prepared is formally received and cannot be said to have not been delivered." Price looked at her. He looked at the 2 men behind him. He looked back at her. "You have a counter notice already prepared," he said. "I have several things already prepared," she said pleasantly. It's been a busy morning. She didn't have a counter notice prepared. Not in the legal sense. She wasn't an attorney, couldn't file one herself. But what she had was the full narrative document she had been writing all morning, and she had just decided it was going to serve a dual purpose. Price's expression shifted. He was reassessing her. She could see it. "I would need to consult with my client before—" "Of course," she said. "Take all the time you need." She paused. "I do want to mention as a point of information that the judge who issued that injunction is named in the documents I've assembled as a co-registrant of the holding company that is the opposing party in this dispute." She let that sit for exactly 1 second. "I would think your client would want to know that before proceeding, since it raises some questions about the validity of any orders issued by that judge in a matter where he has a direct financial interest." Price was very still. "Where did you—" "It's in the public registration records in Denver," she said. "It took me about 4 hours to find. A federal land commissioner would find it considerably faster." Price looked at her for a long moment. Then he said something she had not expected. "How long have you been doing this kind of work?" he said. Not as a challenge, as a genuine question. "About 3 weeks," she said. He blinked. Then he turned to his companions, said something quietly, and turned back to her. "I think I need to send a letter before we proceed further," he said. "That seems wise," she said. She went back inside. She sat down. She let her hands shake for exactly 30 seconds because they had been waiting to shake since Anders left that morning, and they deserved their 30 seconds. Then she picked up her pen and kept writing. The twist came at sundown, and it came from a direction she hadn't expected. It wasn't Ethan. It wasn't Danny returning from Cheyenne. It was Tom Marsh. He arrived on foot, which meant he'd gotten off a horse somewhere outside the property, and walked in, which meant he didn't want anyone to know he was coming before he was already there. He was a man of about 40, weathered with the particular quality of a person who has been wronged and spent a long time carrying it quietly, and has now decided he is done being quiet. Holt saw him first. He came to find Clara immediately. She went out to the yard, and Tom Marsh looked at her and said, "You're the one who wrote to me." "Yes," she said. "You said you had proof about the supply records, about what Langley told Holt about me." "I do." He looked at her the way people look when they want to believe something and have been disappointed enough times to have become careful about wanting things. "I've been trying to get work in this territory for 8 months, he said. 3 ranches turned me away on reputation alone. Didn't want to hear my side of it. Just no. Heard the name, heard what Langley said, and no. He paused. I had to leave the county entirely. My wife and my daughters. Clara held his gaze. "I'm sorry," she said. "What was done to you was deliberate, and it was wrong, and the man who did it has been removed from this property." Marsh was quiet. "And Colby," he said. She looked at him sharply. "You know about Colby?" "I know that when I tried to contest what Langley said about me through the county court, the case was dismissed in about 40 minutes, he said. "I didn't know why then. I think I know why now." He paused. "Is it true the judge—" "Yes," she said. He made a sound, not quite a laugh. Something harder than a laugh. "I lost 8 months of my life, and my family had to move county because a judge was protecting his investment," he said flatly. "Yes," she said, "because there was no version of softening that which was honest. That's what happened." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What do you need from me?" "A statement," she said. "Your account in your own words of everything that happened. What you found, what you said to whom, what Langley told Holt, and what happened to your case in Colby's court." She paused. "It needs to be in your handwriting, and it needs to be signed." He looked at her. "That's all," he said. "That and your willingness to say it in front of the territory attorney's office, if it comes to that." "It's going to come to that," he said. "Not a question. Just a man who understood how these things worked." "Probably," she said. He held out his hand. "Give me the paper," he said. She gave him the paper. He sat down at the table in the records office, and he wrote without stopping for almost an hour. Clara worked beside him, finishing her own narrative document, and the room was quiet, except for the scratch of 2 pens moving across paper with the particular purpose of people who have decided that this time things are going to be said clearly and in full. When he finished, he blew on the ink and looked at what he had written. "It's everything," he said. "All of it." "I know," she said without reading it yet. He looked at her. "How do you know?" "Because you look like a man who's been waiting a long time to say it," she said. "And people who've been waiting that long don't leave anything out." He was quiet. Then roughly, "My daughter's 8. She's been telling her friends her father had to go away for work, because we didn't know how to explain to her what had actually happened." He paused. "I want to be able to tell her what happened, the whole truth, including how it got fixed." Clara set her pen down. "You'll be able to tell her," she said. He nodded once. He didn't look entirely like he believed her, but he looked like he wanted to. Danny came back from Cheyenne at midnight. He was exhausted, and his horse was lathered, and he had ridden both ways with the kind of urgency that only very young men can sustain without their bodies staging a full rebellion. He came to the records office door and knocked, and Clara, who had not been sleeping, opened it immediately. "I found him," Danny said. "Put it in his hands like you said. He read it right there." He pulled a folded piece of paper from inside his shirt. He said, "Give you this." She took the paper. She unfolded it. Ethan's handwriting was like everything else about him, clear, deliberate, no flourish. Territory Attorney's Office has everything. Filing with the Federal Land Commissioner at first light. Colby's conflict of interest is now on record at the territory level. His ability to issue orders affecting this case is being formally challenged. Do not let anyone remove documents from the property. I will be back before noon. E. And then below that in slightly different ink, as if he had added it after he had written and almost sent the rest. You were right. About all of it. Including the part I haven't said yet. She read that last line twice. She folded the paper carefully and put it in her pocket. Good work, she told Danny. Go sleep. He went. She sat back down at the desk. She pressed her hand against her pocket against the folded paper, and she thought about what the part I haven't said yet meant in plain terms, from a man who said very few unnecessary things. She thought about it for a while. Then she set it aside, because there was still work to do, and she was better than anyone at setting aside the things she needed to think about and doing the work that was right in front of her. He arrived at 10:30. Not before noon as promised, slightly ahead of schedule, which was consistent with everything she knew about how he operated. He came into the records office, and she stood up, and they looked at each other, and there was a full second where neither of them said anything, and in that second was the entire compressed weight of everything that had happened since Danny's horse left the yard at a gallop the night before. Colby is being suspended, Ethan said. Pending investigation by the Territory Judiciary Committee. His authority to issue orders in any case involving Hawthorne Ranch or related properties has been formally stayed. Clara breathed. The injunction against you is void, he continued. The Territory Attorney's Office has confirmed that the Federal Land Commissioner is reviewing the Denver filings today. He paused. It's not finished, but the ground has shifted. Marsh is here, she said. He went still. Tom Marsh. He came last night. On his own. He wrote out a full statement. She picked up the pages from the desk and held them out to him. Everything, including the court proceeding. Ethan took the pages. He read the first page. Something crossed his face, something complicated that contained guilt and relief, and the specific weight of having understood too late to prevent the damage, what had been done to a man he had trusted to someone else's care. His family had to leave the county, Clara said quietly. I know, he said. He kept his eyes on the page. He's willing to testify. He shouldn't have to testify, Ethan said. He should have been protected before it got to this. Yes, she said. He should have been. He set the pages down. He looked at her. I have a meeting with the territory attorney in 2 days, he said. In Cheyenne. I'd like you to come. She looked at him. As the person who assembled the evidence, he said carefully. As the person who the territory attorney is going to want to hear from directly, because your documentation is. He called it the most organized evidentiary record he'd received on a property fraud case in 12 years. She felt something move in her chest, small and warm and honest. "What did you say when he said that?" she asked. "I said I wasn't surprised," Ethan said simply. She looked at him for a moment. "I'll come," she said. He nodded. He should have left it there. The practical thing would have been to leave it there. But he looked at her and said quietly, "The letter I sent with Danny." "I got it," she said. "The last part." She held his gaze. "I know what it meant," she said. And she was quiet for one beat. 2. "Ask me again," she said, "when this is finished." He looked at her with the same patience she had first noticed in a man repairing a fence post. The patience of someone who was not in a hurry because he was not afraid of what time would reveal. "All right," he said. He picked up his hat. He was almost at the door when she said, "Ethan." He stopped. "Thank you," she said, "for trusting me with it. The whole thing. All of it." She paused. "Nobody's done that before." He turned and looked at her, and his face, his quiet, unhurried, honest face, did something she hadn't quite seen it do before. It was not quite a smile. It was better than a smile. It was the look of a man who has been waiting for someone to see him clearly and has just understood that they have. "Don't thank me," he said. "You did the seeing." He went out, and Clara stood in the records office. Her records office, she realized genuinely, hers earned by 3 weeks of work that had mattered more than anything she had done in years, and she felt the specific settling of something that had been shifting and unsettled for a very long time. Not finished, not fully resolved, but right. Fundamentally, unmistakably right. She turned back to her desk. She had documents to prepare for Cheyenne. She picked up her pen. She began. The 2 days before the Cheyenne meeting were not quiet. They weren't supposed to be quiet, and Clara would not have trusted quiet at this point. Quiet in the middle of something like this meant something was moving that you couldn't see yet, and she had learned to prefer the visible complications. Price, the attorney from Denver, sent a message. He had consulted with his client, and his client, it turned out, was not simply the holding company. His client was a consortium of 3 investors, of whom Langley and Colby were 2, and the third was a man whose name Clara recognized from the territory land records she had read during her investigation, a real estate speculator named Doyle, who had been buying up distressed ranch properties across the territory for 3 years. He had been buying them cheap. He had been buying them cheap because ranches that were entangled in legal disputes, wage fraud, investigations, or ownership challenges went on the market at a fraction of their value, and he had been creating those entanglements, not alone, but with help. Clara sat with this information for a long, careful moment. Then she went to find Ethan, who was of course at the fence, not repairing it this time, just standing at it the way he stood at it when he was thinking, looking at the land that had been in his family for 30 years. She stood beside him. She told him what Price had revealed. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "It's bigger than we thought," she said. "Yes," he said. "This isn't just about your ranch. Doyle has been doing this across the territory. Hawthorne was just a piece of it." "The most valuable piece," Ethan said. "The most visible. If they could get Hawthorne, it would have opened the door to 8 other properties that border this land." He paused. "I think I always knew there was more to it. I thought if I could stop Langley." "You'd cut the supply line," Clara said. "But Doyle would have just found another Langley." He turned to look at her. "We need to take everything to Cheyenne," she said. "Not just the Hawthorne case, all of it. Every property in this territory that shows the same pattern." She met his eyes. "Do you know people at the Territory Land Office? People you trust?" "Yes," he said. "And the other ranchers, the ones who've been affected by Doyle's purchases?" He was quiet for a moment, in the way he was quiet when he was running a calculation she couldn't see. "I know most of them," he said. "Some of them won't want to come forward. They'll be afraid of what comes after." "What would change their minds?" she asked. He looked at her. "Knowing they're not alone," he said. knowing someone who wasn't afraid to say what it was. She held his gaze. "Then that's where we start," she said. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said something that caught her fully off guard, not because it was dramatic, but because it was entirely simple and entirely honest, and she was not prepared for the specific impact of simple, honest things from this particular man. "I'm glad you came here," he said. "To Silver Creek, to this ranch." He paused. "I know the circumstances weren't. I know it came from loss. And I'm not glad about that. But I'm glad it brought you here." She looked at the land in front of them. She thought about $11 and a suitcase and a letter she had written at midnight in the kind of honest anger that sometimes makes you more truthful than strategy would allow. "So am I," she said. She meant it. She meant it more than she had meant most things in a long time. She didn't look at him when she said it, but she felt him beside her, steady and present and real, and she thought that was its own kind of answer to questions she wasn't quite ready to ask out loud. Not yet, but soon. The road to Cheyenne took 8 hours by coach. Clara spent the first 2 hours reviewing documents. The third hour she spent looking out the window at the territory moving past and thinking about nothing specific, which was her mind's way of processing everything at once without admitting it was doing so. Ethan sat across from her and read, and did not try to fill the silence, which was one of the things she had come to rely on about him without ever deciding to. Holt had stayed behind with Tom Marsh and 4 of the older hands with instructions that were clear and complete. Nobody in or out of the records room without written authorization. Every remaining document photographed by description in a running log, and if anyone from the county court arrived with papers, they were to be received politely, and Holt's attorney in Laramie was to be contacted within the hour. Clara had written out those instructions herself. Ethan had read them over and said, "You think of everything." "I think of what I've seen fail before," she said. "It looks like the same thing, but it isn't." He had looked at her with that expression she'd stopped trying to categorize the one that wasn't admiration exactly, because admiration implied distance, and this was something closer than that. On the 4th hour of the road, he set down what he was reading and said, "Can I ask you something?" "You're going to ask it regardless," she said without looking up from her papers. He almost smiled. "When this is finished, and it will finish Clara one way or another, what do you want?" She looked up. "What do I want?" she repeated. "Not for the case, not for the ranch or the hands or Marsh." He held her gaze. "For yourself. What did you come west looking for before Silver Creek? Before Hawthorne? What were you actually after?" It was the most direct thing he had asked her in 5 weeks of conversation. She looked at him for the moment. She thought about the honest answer which she had been avoiding for exactly as long as she had been in Wyoming. "Somewhere I could be useful," she said finally, "without having to be small to do it." He held her gaze. "You found it," he said. "I know," she said. She looked back at her papers, but she was not reading them. She was sitting with the weight of what she had just admitted out loud for the first time to him, to herself, to the 8-hour road to Cheyenne, and finding that the weight of it was not heavy, that it was the opposite of heavy, that it was the kind of thing you carry for a long time before you understand it was never a burden. It was just the truth waiting to be said. The territory attorney's office was on the 2nd floor of a limestone building that smelled of old paper and wood polish. The man who received them was named Garrett 50-ish, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles and the energy of a man who had been waiting for exactly this kind of case for longer than he was comfortable admitting. He shook Ethan's hand. He shook Clara's hand. He looked at the folder she placed on his desk. He opened it. He read for 11 minutes without speaking. Clara counted because she needed something to do with her hands, and counting was quiet. When he looked up, he said, "Miss Bennett, who trained you in evidentiary documentation?" "Nobody," she said. "I trained myself. After my family's property was taken through a fraudulent deed transfer, and no one with the authority to stop it chose to do so." Garrett looked at her over his spectacles. "I see," he said. He looked back at the folder. He turned 3 more pages. He set it down. "The Colby issue is significant," he said. A sitting circuit court judge, co-investing in a scheme to defraud property owners in his own jurisdiction, that is not a small thing. That is a very large, very public, very damaging thing. And the Territory Judiciary Committee is going to want to move on it before it becomes a newspaper story rather than a legal proceeding. He paused. Which means we have a narrow window in which to work. Doyle, Ethan said. Garrett nodded. Yes. Doyle is the bigger concern. Langley and Colby are instruments. Doyle is the mechanism. He has been operating this scheme across at least 6 territories that I'm currently aware of. The only reason we haven't moved on him before is that individual cases look like individual cases. He's very careful to keep the threads separate. He looked at Clara's documentation. What you've assembled here is the first time I've seen someone lay out the pattern explicitly. Clara leaned forward slightly. Then use it as the pattern, she said. Not just for Hawthorne. Use it as the framework to re-examine every distressed property sale in this territory for the past 3 years. If Doyle has been creating these situations deliberately, there will be a signature, the same sequence of events, the same kind of disruption, the same paper trail structure. It won't look identical because he's not careless, but it will rhyme. Garrett was very still. You're suggesting a territory-wide investigation, he said. I'm suggesting that what happened to Hawthorne Ranch was not unique, she said, and that the people it happened to are owed the same effort that's being made here. Ethan said nothing. He was watching Clara. Garrett looked between them. Then he picked up a pen. Start from the beginning, he said to Clara. Walk me through the documentation sequentially. I want to understand every decision you made and why you made it. She pulled the first page toward her. She began. They were in Garrett's office for 4 hours. When they came out, the light had changed, and the street below the building was quieter, and Clara's hand ached from the sustained precision of pointing to specific lines in documents for extended periods of time, which was not a complaint she was going to make out loud to anyone. Ethan bought coffee from a cart at the corner and handed her a cup without asking whether she wanted it because he had been paying attention for 5 weeks, and he knew she always wanted coffee. She took it. They stood on the street and drank without speaking for a moment. He's going to move on Doyle, Ethan said. Yes, she said. It's going to take time. Yes, she said again. Months probably. Months, she agreed. But Colby's suspension holds. Langley's criminal exposure is already filed. The land commissioner has frozen the Denver filings. She paused. The immediate threats to the ranch are contained. The rest is making sure it stays contained, and that the people who've been waiting for someone to do something about Doyle get what they've been waiting for. He was quiet for a moment. My father used to say that justice isn't an event, he said. It's a direction. She looked at him. He sounds like a man worth quoting, she said. He was a man worth knowing, Ethan said. And something in his voice, just for a moment, carried all 30 years of the ranch and the old ledger on the desk and the 140 acres and 12 cattle. She heard it. She did not look away. He would have liked you, Ethan said. It was not a performance. He said it the way he said everything plainly, because it was true, and because he saw no reason to dress it as something more complicated. Clara looked at her coffee cup. Don't say things like that to me right now, she said quietly. Why not? Because I'm trying to maintain a professional composure, and you keep making it difficult. He was quiet, then the nearest thing to a laugh she had ever heard from him. Not a full laugh. A breath warm and genuine that carried the shape of one. I'll try to be less honest, he said. That's not what I said, she said. I know, he said, but it's what you meant. She looked up at him. She almost said something. She chose not to. Not yet. But the almost was large and deliberate, and he could see it, and he was patient enough to wait for it, and that was enough for right now. Chow. They returned to Silver Creek 2 days later. The first thing Clara did was go to the records office and check that everything was where she had left it. It was. Holt's log showed 4 entries, 3 routine, 1 recording an attempt by a county clerk to deliver a second injunction that Holt's attorney had rejected on the grounds of Colby's suspended authority within 40 minutes of its arrival. Holt had written the note in his spare factual way. At the bottom, he had added, "Handled." Clara set the log down and felt for the second time in a week the very specific satisfaction of systems working the way they were supposed to. She went to find Marsh. He was in the bunkhouse, the only non-hand in it, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee and a look on his face that said he had not been sleeping well, which was understandable. "Garrett's office is filing a formal case," she told him. "Your statement is part of the record. Your name is not going to disappear from this, but it's going to appear on the right side of it." He looked at her. "And Colby," he said. "Suspended, pending investigation. He cannot issue any orders affecting your case or any related matter." He absorbed that. His jaw worked for a moment. Then he said, "I need to call my wife." "There's a telegraph office in town," she said. "Ethan will arrange a wagon." He stood up. He was not a demonstrative man. She had understood that within 20 minutes of meeting him. He was the kind of man who showed what he felt through action rather than expression. So when he held out his hand, she knew what it meant. She shook it. He left to find the wagon. She stood in the empty bunkhouse for a moment. She thought about his daughter, 8 years old, telling her friends her father had gone away for work. She thought about what it would mean for that girl to have her father come home and be able to tell her the truth. She pressed her hand against the table. She breathed. She was not going to cry about it. She was satisfied. Satisfied was the right word for what she felt. The clean, solid, bone-deep satisfaction of work that had mattered, completed to the fullest possible degree. She went back to her records office and started preparing the documentation Garrett's office had requested for the broader investigation. She worked for 3 hours. She was deep in it. The good deep, the kind where time moves strangely, and the work feels like thinking with her hands when she heard footsteps in the doorway. She didn't look up. "Holt. I need the supply records from 18 months back, the ones we pulled for the Garrett file. They need to be." "It's not Holt," Ethan said. She looked up. He was standing in the doorway with the particular quality of presence he had when he was about to say something he had been preparing to say for a while. She set down her pen. "Close the door," she said. He did. He sat down across from her in the chair Langley had sat in. She noticed and found a small satisfaction in the fact that it was now occupied by someone entirely different. "The hands had a meeting this morning," he said. She raised her eyebrows. "Will organized it," Ethan said. "He went to each man individually and asked them if they wanted to formally request that you be given a permanent position managing operations records for the ranch. Not the records woman, not the temporary hire." He paused. "Chief Operations Administrator, which is a title I've never used before, but which Will apparently researched at the library in town." Clara stared at him. "Will went to the library?" she said. "He did," Ethan confirmed. "To find a title." "Correct. For a position he wanted me to have. Unanimously supported," Ethan said. "All 23 men, including Holt, who signed the request, which in 15 years I have never seen Holt do for anything he wasn't entirely certain about." She was quiet for a moment. She looked at the records around her, 5 weeks of her work organized and cross-referenced, and exactly as she would have wanted them to be. The kind of order that only existed when someone genuinely cared about the work rather than just performing care. "I'd need to restructure the entire record system," she said slowly. "I assumed you'd say that," he said. "And I'd want to build a proper wage verification process, so nothing like the Langley situation can get established in the first place." "Good. And the Southwest parcel documents need to be completely rebuilt from the originals once the land commissioner clears the filings." "I've already flagged those for you," he said. She looked at him. I was watching her run through it, the practical architecture of a decision she had already made, but was processing through the details, the way she processed everything. He understood this about her. He waded through it. "This is the part," she said, "where a less careful person would say something significant about more than the job." "Yes," he said. "Are you a less careful person?" she said. He held her gaze. "With most things," he said, "I'm very careful." He paused. "With this, I've decided I'm done being careful." She looked at him. "Then say it," she said quietly. He leaned forward, forearms on the desk, and he looked at her with the same directness he had turned on her from the very first morning. No pretense, no performance, no management of how he appeared. "I don't want you to stay because of the job," he said. "I want you to stay. The job is real, and it's yours if you want it, and it has nothing to do with anything else. But I want you to know separately and clearly that the ranch and the work and the title are not the reason I'm sitting in this chair right now." She didn't look away. "What is the reason?" she said. "You already know," he said. She did. She had known since the East pasture, since the coffee in the early mornings, since the moment he looked at her across Holt's office when Langley was making his move, and she had felt completely without ambiguity that she was not alone. Since the letter with Danny. Since the line at the bottom in different ink, including the part I haven't said yet. "I know," she said. And she folded her hands on the desk. She made herself meet his eyes because she had decided somewhere between Cheyenne and Silver Creek that she was done managing the distance between what she felt and what she let herself say. "I came here with $11, she said, "and a letter, and the intention of building a life that made sense after everything that had gone wrong." She paused. "I didn't come here expecting to find—" She stopped. "I didn't expect you." "I know," he said. "You're complicated," she said. "I'm aware. You lied to me." "I withheld," he said. "I know that's a thin distinction." "It's not thin to me," she said. "But it's also not the only thing." She paused. "You trusted me with everything else. Your land, your people, your father's ledger." She looked at him. "The men on this ranch trust you the way people trust someone who has earned it over a long time. Not performance. Real trust." She paused again. "And I trust you. That's the part I've been arguing with myself about. Because trusting people has cost me before." "I know," he said quietly. "And I'm still going to," she said. "Trust you. I already do." She held his gaze. "I just want you to know it's not because of what you own. I want you to know I understand that's what you were afraid of. That I would only be here because of that." He was very still. "You were never that," he said. "From the first morning in the kitchen, you never were." She looked at him. "I know," she said. The room was quiet. The afternoon light came through the window, the way it always did in the records office, the same light she had worked in for 5 weeks, the familiar quality of it. She picked up her pen. "I accept the position," she said. He exhaled. She kept her eyes on her work, but she was smiling not for him to see, just for herself, just the small private thing of it. "Clara," he said. She looked up. "Thank you," he said, simply. "Don't thank me," she said. "Give me the Southwest parcel documents." He stood up. He was smiling. She had learned in 5 weeks to read what smiling looked like on him. It was not large. It didn't need to be. He went and got the documents. The weeks that followed were the kind of weeks you only understand in retrospect, not dramatic in any single moment, but accumulating quietly and irresistibly into something that mattered. Garrett's office opened the territory-wide investigation into Doyle's operations in September. It made the Cheyenne newspaper on a Thursday morning and was picked up by 2 papers in Denver by Friday. Clara read the article once, set it down, and went back to the Southwest parcel records she was rebuilding, because the newspaper article was the beginning of someone else's work, and she had enough of her own. Langley's criminal case moved to the Territory Court away from Silver Creek and Colby's Reach in October. He entered a negotiated guilty plea to 3 charges in November. The workers' wages. 2 years of shortfall calculated to the cent from Clara's records were repaid in full from the funds recovered from his accounts. She sat with each man individually when the payments were distributed. Not because she had to, because she wanted to. Will shook her hand with both of his and then looked embarrassed about it, which she found endearing. Holt said, "Well done, Miss Bennett," and went back to his office. Coming from Holt, it was a speech. Tom Marsh's case was formally vacated in November. He was back in his own county before December, his name cleared in the 3 ranches that had turned him away his family home by Christmas. He sent her a letter. It was short. Not a man who used many words. My daughter wanted me to write to you. She says thank you for bringing her father home. She drew you a picture. It is enclosed. She says it's a horse. I believe her." Clara kept the drawing. She pinned it to the wall of the records office. Ethan saw it one morning and didn't say anything, but she caught him looking at it with an expression she didn't have a word for, yet something between tenderness and a very specific kind of gratitude. She kept working. The twist that nobody had anticipated came in December, and it came from Doyle. He had been building his defense for 4 months. He had a team of attorneys. He had, it turned out, anticipated that someone would eventually assemble the pattern Clara had assembled, and he had spent 2 years preparing for that eventuality with the same methodical patience he had used to construct the scheme in the first place. What he had not prepared for was the thing that came from within his own organization. His bookkeeper, a quiet woman named Ruth, who had worked for his Denver operation for 6 years and had never once been asked her name by any of the partners, walked into Garrett's office on a Tuesday morning in December with a ledger under her arm and placed it on his desk. It was Doyle's master ledger. The real one. Not the version maintained for appearances, but the one that Ruth had kept in a locked drawer in her own shorthand, because she was the kind of person who understood that the only protection available to someone in her position was knowing more than anyone believed she knew. Garrett sent for Clara. She came. She sat in his office, and she looked at Ruth's ledger. Ruth was 53, with neat gray hair and work-worn hands, and the composure of a woman who had made a decision she had been living up to for 6 years without ever knowing exactly when she would act on it. "What made you bring it now?" Clara asked her. Ruth looked at her steadily. "I read about the investigation," she said. "In the Denver paper." She paused. The article mentioned that the evidence was assembled by a woman who had lost her family's property to a fraudulent deed transfer and had been told nothing could be done. She looked at Clara. "That was me in 1879. Different state, different scheme, same result." She paused. Nothing was done. Clara was very quiet. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm not here for sorry," Ruth said, not unkindly. "I'm here because if it had been someone like you in 1879, someone who kept looking when they told her to stop, it wouldn't have happened to me." She put her hand flat on the ledger. "So." Clara looked at the ledger. She thought about 1879, about all the years between 1879 and this moment, about the accumulated weight of all the cases. Nobody had built, all the documents nobody had kept, all the things that had gone unaddressed, because no one with the authority to do something had been willing to use it. She thought about her father's farm. She thought about Ruth's farm wherever it was in 1879. She thought about the fact that this moment Ruth's ledger on Garrett's desk would not have happened without everything that came before it. Without the farm, she lost. Without the $11 and the letter. Without Silver Creek. Without the quiet cowboy at the fence. She pressed her hand next to Ruth's on the ledger. "Thank you," she said. Ruth nodded once. "Don't thank me," she said. "Use it." Doyle's case broke open in January. Ruth's ledger cross-referenced with Clara's documentation with Marsh's statement. With the territory-wide records, Garrett's office had assembled over 4 months, built something that was, as Garrett put it in a letter to Clara, essentially irrefutable. Doyle negotiated. He had no other option. In exchange for a reduced criminal exposure, he agreed to the restoration of every property that had been acquired under fraudulent circumstances in the territory over the preceding 3 years. 6 ranches, 42 individual landowners. The smallest of them was a widow with 12 acres and 3 horses, who had sold in despair after a series of manufactured legal pressures she couldn't afford to fight. Clara was in Garrett's office when the final accounting was presented. She read the list of names. She was not going to cry about it. She cried about it. Not loudly. Not in a way that interrupted the proceedings. She held it together with the discipline of 5 months of practice at holding things together, and nobody in the room said anything, because everyone in the room understood what the list of names represented. Afterward, in the hallway, Ethan handed her a handkerchief without comment. She took it. She pressed it against her eyes for a moment. "Don't say anything meaningful," she said, her voice not quite level. I wasn't going to, he said. Good. They stood in the hallway of the territory attorney's office on a January afternoon, and she held a borrowed handkerchief, and he stood beside her in the specific way he had always stood beside her, close enough that it meant something, giving her enough room to breathe. When she was ready, she handed the handkerchief back. We need to get the restoration paperwork started, she said. Garrett's team is already on it, he said. I want to review it. I assumed you would. She looked at him. I mean on behalf of the landowners, not the ranch, separately. He looked at her. As their advocate, she said. Someone needs to make sure every one of those 42 people understands exactly what they're entitled to, and exactly what the documentation means, and how to make sure it's done correctly. She met his eyes. Someone should have done that for my family. Nobody did. Ethan held her gaze. Do you want to do that? He said. Formally. Build it as a practice. She thought about it. Not instead of the ranch, she said. I'm not leaving Hawthorne, but alongside it. She paused. There's enough work. There is, he said quietly. She looked at the door to Garrett's office. The 42nd name on that list, she said. The widow with 12 acres. What about her? Her land borders a property in Laramie County. I want to make sure the restoration documents are airtight on her parcel specifically. Doyle's attorneys are going to look for any technicality that lets them reduce what's returned to the smallest holders first. They always do. I know, Ethan said. You know. She looked at him. I had the same conversation with Garrett this morning, he said. Before you arrived. He paused. I told him the smallest properties needed the tightest documentation. She looked at him. You thought of it before I said anything, she said. You would have thought of it first, he said. I just had more time in the building. She almost smiled. She looked at the list in her hand. 42 names. 42 families. 12 acres and 6 ranches and everything in between. Let's go back in, she said. Spring came to Hawthorne Ranch, the way it always did, suddenly after a winter that had seemed like it might last forever, with the particular quality of warmth that made people who had lived through hard seasons understand what warmth actually was. Clara walked the east fence line on a Saturday in April. Not because anything needed checking, because the land was beautiful in April, and she had learned slowly to let herself notice that. She heard footsteps behind her, and she knew whose they were without turning. Ethan fell into step beside her. They walked for a while without speaking. The land stretched in every direction, the land his father had started with 140 acres and 12 cattle. The land that had nearly been taken piece by piece through the patience of men who thought patience was the same thing as entitlement. Marsh's wife wrote to me, Clara said. What did she say? She said Tom has been sleeping again, properly. She paused. She said she didn't understand everything that happened, but she understood that someone decided he was worth fighting for when he couldn't fight for himself. Ethan was quiet. She said she hopes I'm happy, Clara said. They walked a few more steps. Are you? He said. She thought about it honestly. She thought about $11 and the suitcase and the letter she had written at midnight in honest anger. She thought about the first morning in the kitchen and the east pasture and the old ledger on the desk, and Holt saying, Well done, Miss Bennett and Will, going to the library to find a title that didn't exist yet. She thought about 42 names on a list in a hallway in Cheyenne. She thought about a man who fixed fences before signing checks, who ate at the long table, who had everything and lived like the things that mattered most couldn't be purchased. Yes, she said, not because it was the easy answer, because it was the true one. Ethan stopped walking. She stopped too. She turned to look at him. He was looking at her the way he'd looked at the land in the evenings, with the specific attention of a man who understands that what he is looking at is worth keeping and has committed to the work of keeping it. I need to ask you something, he said. You're going to ask it regardless, she said. He did not smile this time. He was completely serious, and serious looked like this on him, open and direct, and without any of the armor that most people kept ready for moments that mattered. Stay, he said. Not the job. Not the ranch. Her. Not as records administrator. Not as anything professional. He paused. Stay because this is where you belong. Because I believe you know that now. And because I want to build what comes next with the person who reminded me why any of it was worth building in the first place. She looked at him. She looked at the land. She thought about everything she had spent 3 years looking for usefulness without smallness. Truth without apology. A place where the work she was capable of was the work that was needed. She thought about a man who had millions of dollars and old boots, and a patient, honest, unperformable kindness that had been there the very first morning before she knew his name. She had loved the ranch hand. She had come to understand the rancher. She now knew completely the same man. I'm not going anywhere, she said. He held her gaze. Is that a yes? He said. That's a yes, she said. He reached out and took her hand. She let him. The land was warm, and the fence line stretched ahead, and somewhere in the distance, one of the hands was calling to another, and the ordinary sounds of a working ranch went on exactly as they always had, indifferent to the fact that something had just settled into place that was going to hold for a very long time. Clara Bennett had arrived in Silver Creek, Wyoming, with $11 a suitcase, and the determination to build a life that made sense after everything that had been taken from her. She had built something better than sense. She had built something true. And the man beside her who had fixed fences before he signed checks, who had eaten at the long table, when he could have eaten anywhere, who had chosen every day to be the man he was when nobody was watching, held her hand with the steady certainty of someone who had been looking for exactly this, without knowing its name, for a very long time. Some things are worth more than what can be measured in land or cattle or gold. Some things are worth more than the biggest fortune in the West. And both of them, standing on the land that had been worth fighting for, finally knew exactly what those things were.